It's Jahf Reach coming to you live and alive from the city of Jahf Reach with today's show called Open-Minded, Not Blinded. We have a very special guest today and a very interesting topic. I'm so excited. So, as we dive into it here, you all know, thank you for tuning in. All my listeners in the city of Jahf Reach, it's the Jahf Reach Show, Open-Minded, Not Blinded, where you get to challenge your mindsets. This show is about you and it's for you. Today's topic is called Violent Video Games, Kids and Adults. So this episode is sponsored by Nuclear Sound Studio, based in Australia. Audio, visual, production, and full mastering. But they do work worldwide. So don't be afraid to reach out to them. So I want to start off today by asking all my loyal listeners and fans and friends and family to do me a favor. Please click the notification bell for this channel and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So that's two things I'm asking you to do. Click the notification bell and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much. Today we have a very special guest, as I mentioned. I'm talking about Connor. Please introduce yourself to the listeners in the great city of Jahf Reach.
Hey everyone, it's Connie here from Nuclear Sound Studio. I'm very excited to be on the podcast, talking from one end of the world to the other in real time.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today. Connor, we look forward to doing so much with you and getting so much information and so much interesting feedback. So I think it's worth mentioning that I appreciate your comment on Facebook last night. It definitely speaks to the fact that we really need to ask questions or more questions and challenge our mindsets, not just limit ourselves by fixating on one or two words and starting fights, breaking up homes, relationships, and creating enemies because of it. So thank you so much for that. Now on to the topic of today: violent video games and some of the risk factors associated with it. And we're talking about in the interest of kids and adults. So based on our research here, studies have shown that playing violent video games can increase aggressive thoughts, behaviors, and feelings in both short. Let me say that again, just so we can be specifically clear here on this one. Based on our research here, studies have shown that playing violent video games can increase aggressive thoughts, behaviors of aggressiveness, and feelings in both the short-term and long-term life. Unfortunately, few studies have been completed on violent video games exposure and aggression in children under the age of 10. So, with this information, Connor, how long have you been playing video games?
I would say about since I was, since 10. Since I was about 10.
So, as it says here, the studies haven't shown that exposure and aggression in children under the age of 10. Right, so you've been playing since you were 10. So that means, based on other studies, you may be vulnerable to be aggressive and violent because you started playing after the age of 10. Now, with that being said, what is your definition of a violent video game?
My definition of a violent video game would be something that involves shooting people or killing people in the first place, you know.
So anything basically that has violence or
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jahf. Just something that is where you're inflicting an act of violence against someone.
Okay, so, and usually those violent video games, what are they rated as? So just so the listeners can get this information, because this show is all about inspiration, motivation, and education. So if somebody was to go to a store or go looking for a violent video game, or they were trying to avoid purchasing a violent video game, what is it rated as? What would they be looking for?
Well, these days, it's very varied. When I was a kid, let's think about 10 years ago, not 10 years ago, about 15 years ago probably, the video games were rated M15, some of them were rated MA, kind of thing, but there was never any R-rated video games. But these days, you've got video games that are a lot more, the graphics, as far as the visuals in the game, they're a lot more textured and detailed, and you end up with a lot more violence there as well. So I have seen lots of games that haven't really had a rating to do with M15 or PG or MA, because lots of games lately are just kind of, that they kind of have a warning on them saying that young people shouldn't play these games. That's just based on my experience.
Oh, yeah, and I definitely think I can actually relate or agree with most of that information you just said. So you did make mention that the graphics are so real. So you're saying based on the graphics now, the violence in the games appear to be more realistic.
Yeah.
Okay. So why do you think they have went from the more sort of cartoon look that video games used to have into the more 3D or 4D look where they can actually, where it shows and looks more violent? Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think there's any reason why it's been increased in a violence kind of topic. I think just as technology has progressed, the visuals in video games in general have progressed. Like not just violent video games, lots of other games where you're just like even just simple stuff where it's like a game of like a simple game that you used to play on a Game Boy or on a PlayStation or something. You can still play those games now, but they are so like high definition and stuff like that. And so to answer your question, though, I don't think there's any real reason why it's headed that way. I think it's more just because of technological advances throughout the years.
That definitely makes sense to me too. I definitely am in full agreement with that. That makes sense to me. I just have to answer I'll ask specific questions here that some listeners did send in to me. So I think it's important to get those information out there, because the show is all about education, motivation, and inspiration. So, can you list for me a few violent video games, or the ones that people may see as violent?
Well, the main video games that I would think of, based on my own experience, would be the Grand Theft Auto video games. They would be a top one because they're marketed as like a fun video game where you drive around and you drive around in cool cars and you do a couple of quests and stuff, but a lot of it is to do with killing people and or shooting someone or intimidating someone. And I've played those kind of video games since I was about maybe 12 or 13, and because I found them very fun. you know, but other video games I would think of would be like Halo or the Walking Dead series video games.
Okay, and I know you mentioned Grand Theft Auto. I think that's a huge one. So if I can talk about that for a few minutes. Grand Theft Auto, I noticed also you can steal people's belongings. You can even run them over with your car if you like. You can steal their car. You see blood. I'm not sure how much it has advanced, but I remember back then when I seen the game, I remember you could purchase guns. You can go to dance clubs. You can
That's right.
run people over, and you can see some blood coming out of their body. You can run them over while after you hit them, you can run them over with your car a few times, and they keep bleeding and stuff. So you said that's one of the most popular ones.
In my opinion, yeah, because of how it's marketed, there are lots of more violent video games than the Grand Theft Auto ones, but I would say as far as popularity and the amount of people playing the games, yeah, I would say that the Grand Theft Auto games would be definitely up there on the list.
All right, so that's good to know. That's helpful information. I'm going to reach out to the team here and see what other information they have when it comes to popular video games that are listed as violent. So let me just do a really quick feedback here from the team and see what is here on the list, what is sent to me. So we have let's do only 4. Let's do 4. And let's see what we have here. We have Celeste. I don't know what it is. I've never heard about it. We have Red Dead Redemption 2.
Oh, yeah.
We have God of War is the number 3. And we have Marvel's Spider-Man, which is interesting. That I would never imagine that one making the list.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I've watched Spider-Man for a great part of my life, and I would never imagine that being listed as a violent video game.
Well, I can tell you, I've played. I haven't played the latest Red Dead Redemption game, but I played the one that came before it, and I thought it was a fantastic game. It was very violent, but that adds to the story. That adds to the world that the game is set in.
Okay, that makes sense to me too. So, brings me to the next set of questions now. Why, according to your definition, because you just mentioned it adds to the story of the game and that's why it's somewhat violent. According to your definition, do you or have you or are you currently playing any violent video games?
Yeah, I am. At the moment, I'm playing the video game Skyrim. It's a very popular one that came out in 2011, and lots of people played it for a long time, and there's lots of people still playing it. It's more of it is centered around violence, so lots of the different objectives that you get given by different people to go and eliminate this person so that you can then bring back an item to this person that has it's very much like a whole big world that you could get yourself lost in. So it is based around violence, lots of the quests, but at the same time you can go exploring, you can go gather ingredients to make some potions at the same time. And so, yeah, to answer your question again, I am playing a violent video game, but there's a lot more to it than violence, I think.
Awesome. And I think it's important to note that you do not come off or sound or appear to be a violent person. However, the topic of the show is violent video games and how it affects or could affect kids and adult life. So why do you think people associate violent video games with people's real life aggression and in some cases violence?
To be honest with you, Jahf, I really don't know. I think a lot of it is to do with opinions of journalists or media personalities saying that this is bad, like heavy metal music, for example, makes angry people. Like, I've been listening to heavy metal since I was about 13, and I'm not an angry person. I'm a very relaxed person, as a matter of fact. And like you were saying before, how that I don't seem to be a violent person. I'm definitely not a violent. I've had a lot of encounters with aggression in my teenage years, and it's made me want to be a lover, not a fighter, so to speak. You know,
A lover, not a fighter.
that's me.
I think you're auditioning for a date or two here, Connor. A lover, not a fighter.
Yeah, definitely. No, so I don't know. I don't think there's apart from outside influence of people going, those games make people violent, or something like that. Apart from that, I don't think there's any relationship between people playing violent video games and becoming a violent person or anything like that.
So basically, something stood out to me when you answered there. You said that media influences. So you're saying there's a stigma attached to people who play video games or violent video games. So the media perpetuates this idea or this image that is because of the video games or the violence in video games that causes people to be violent, or when they act out or they react in a way that society may not condone. The media or the people of influence or people in positions of influence, like the media. So we have social media, we have the news media, we have newspapers, we have all those people in power, positions of power. They give this sort of image that says that it's because of the video game. That's why kids are going to school and shooting up schools and going to the movies and taking people's lives. It's because of the video games they're playing. Are you saying this is mainly the idea people associate violence in real life to video games because of the media influence? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's what I believe. Yeah. Like it's like it makes me think straight away of the Columbine school shooting that happened in the late 90s, where heavy metal music and violent video games got a lot of the blame for the two young men that did what they did, because they like to listen to Marilyn Manson, and they like to play video games that were gory. And so the journalists and media use those two things to go, well, of course, like if they were listening to this kind of music and playing these video games, of course they would have done what they did. Do you know what I mean?
Wow, so that's interesting. I really love that point. And the fact that you brought up the media. So you're saying it's easier for media and people in position of power, like politicians and so on, heads of government, it's easier for them to blame it on music or video games as opposed to taking responsibility, which means they would have to find the true cause and maybe even find a solution to the cause of the violence that's taking place. It's easier for them to blame it on the video games and or music. Yeah, I agree with you. Well, I was just summarizing what you said there, so that's what you're trying to say, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. That is right. Yes.
Perfect. So that brings us to the next question here. How do you think parents should view violent video games when it comes to their kids?
Well, I think they should view it a lot more than parents do. I know I worded that a little bit strangely, but I think lots of parents don't know what their kids are actually playing. I know that when I was young, I asked my parents to buy me a Grand Theft Auto video game, and they, I may have told them that it was like a car racing game kind of thing, because lots of it was to do with being in a car and driving around for doing different stuff. But that's one little element of it. A lot of it was to do with violence and shooting and stuff like that. So my parents didn't understand that until I got it and I showed them me doing violent stuff in the video game. So I think that parents need to be more aware of what their kids are doing in their video games. Not that it's bad to play violent video games at all. I've been playing violent video games since I was like at least 9 or 10. You know, like games that have involved shooting someone. But I just think parents should be just aware. Like they should just check in and see what their kids are doing in their video games.
Wow, that's interesting. So it's important. You're saying it's important for parents to pay attention to what their kids are playing, not necessarily because it's bad or it's going to do harm to the kids, but because they should be involved with what their kids are involved with.
If you can play what you would like to play. Just I think just as long as the parents are just aware of what the kids are playing. Like, you know how you hear about Fortnite and kids playing Fortnite for hours and hours. I've never played it myself, but I just think if some parents were to watch their kids play it for longer than like a couple of minutes, if they were to sit down and watch them play it and stuff, they would get a little bit more of an understanding why their kids are playing these games for hours on end, instead of just looking at it in like they're glued to the TV kind of thing. They would be able to understand the reason why the kids keep coming back to the game over and over again. Can you understand what I mean?
Yes, and to add to that, I think it's also, I definitely agree with what you just said, but to add just a little to that, I think it would also give the parent some one-on-one time and maybe even show the kid that they care about what they're doing.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So it can send a message without trying to send a message.
For sure.
Okay, so with that being said, I've heard that some parents don't care what their kids play as long as they don't have to interact with the kids as much. Do you think this is the case as to why some kids are allowed to play violent video games?
Because are you asking because their parents don't? Their parents are saying that they. So I'm sorry. Could you please rephrase that?
The parent is basically saying, "Hey, guess what? I don't care what you're playing. I don't care what you're doing. As long as I don't have to interact with you and I don't have to deal with you, I can go out there and do my own thing, or I can be in the home doing my own thing. I don't have to interact with you, so I don't care what you're doing. So basically, do whatever you like as long as I don't have to interact with you."
Yeah.
So do you think this is the case as to why some kids are allowed to play violent video games?
Yeah. Well, if the parents saying like do what you want as long as I don't have to. Yeah. Of course, and especially if they've got an older sibling as well that already plays the games as well, that have shooting and violence in them and stuff, they'll be influenced from that as well, right?
Wow, that's a huge point. That's a big one. That's a big one. I love how you mentioned that. I hopefully before this episode is over, we'll get back to that. Just remember, people, if you're just joining the city of Jahf Reach and you're listening, we are talking about violent video games and how it can influence somebody's life, whether you're a kid or an adult. So this is what the episode is about, and I have a special guest here with me always in Australia. That's Connor. So I just want to read an excerpt from a news posting in 2010. This is in the USA. The Supreme Court is weighing arguments for and against a California law banning the sale of violent video games to minors. The dispute, and the reason why I want to mention this, Connor, is because you talked about how the older siblings can influence the younger ones. So they wanted to ban the sale of violent video games to minors. And in turn, what happens is the older adult or the older sibling could actually bring the game or already have the game or go purchase the game and even leave it for the minor to play. And I've seen this numerous times already, right? So
yeah.
The dispute is over whether it's a violation of free speech to ban the games, but the issue is really about public health, the health of those who play, and the health of everyone they encounter. So basically they're saying if you play violent video games, oh my gosh, you are unsafe. You can be a health hazard or safety hazard to everyone you encounter. What do you think about this?
I don't think about the health or safety hazard. I think that's a little bit silly to call it that. I know with what you were saying about did it actually get passed with not being able to sell the video games to minors?
I don't think it got passed, and this was specific to California law. So even if it did get passed, it may have been for a short space of time. Actually, like you said, it's very silly. So I can't really see the passing of a bill like this because for the reasons I mentioned already, right? The older sibling could actually purchase the games. Just like with the sale of alcohol, there's people that purchase alcohol for minors. So this would be absolutely ridiculous. So I just wanted to know your thoughts.
Yeah,
I just wanted to know your thoughts on it.
Well, man, when I was younger, I got my friends' older brothers to buy me video games, you know, and that. So, yeah, you know, I think, like you said, it's going to happen either way. Same with the alcohol, when you've got someone underage and someone that actually can afford it, not afford it, someone that actually is the age to be able to buy it. That you just get them to buy it. It's always going to happen. It's going to happen with anything that you know, kind of like that.
In the same excerpt news posting, they went on to say, certainly it is good for children to play. In fact, kids are not getting enough free play today, leading to a high rate of ADHD and diminished social capacities. Kids learn many things through play, especially friendly, rough and tumble play, which helps the brain develop in multiple ways, including building social competence. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, so are you talking about, so first of all, are we talking about physical or mental play?
So they were saying, so they basically included both of them in there. So they're saying rough and tumble play, which helps the brain develop. So they were talking about the physical, real life, rough housing, or however you want to call it, depending on what part of the world you come from. Wild play, rough play, tumble, you know. So they're saying the same way they interact in the video games, it stimulates the mind in a way that it reduces mental illnesses such as ADHD. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I know that for myself, I play a video game pretty much every night. I was mentioning Skyrim before. I play that pretty much every night, just as like a release, like as an escape from this world into a different world. You turn the lights off and put your headphones on and you just escape for a bit. I think that video games can definitely help people with their I know you were talking about like you were talking about was it the lack of or the more stimulation with the ADHD?
So they're saying it will reduce the risk of illnesses such as it will reduce it if they were to play. So whether it was physically playing or virtually playing in video games.
So I can't say much about the physical side, like the rough kind of stuff. I was never much like that growing up, but I think about the mental side of it. Yeah, it could definitely help people with different situations, different conditions or issues they have with their brain. I think playing video games regularly can definitely help with like cognitive functions or different stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a lot can be learned from video games also, right? It's just what you want to take away from it, or I think it's even wise and helpful for parents, as we mentioned earlier, parents to be involved so that way they can say, this is okay, this is not. I like this part, but don't get into this part. I think the awareness about it and the making it a social interaction as opposed to a social isolation, because some people want to completely isolate themselves from their kids or from the games because of the stigma or the negative stigma surrounding violent video games. And I think there has to be a way where we can actually bridge that gap, and that's why I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation today and on this episode. And I want to continue by saying we have to understand something. More than 90% of American kids play video games. The number might be as high as 99% of boys and 94% of girls. That's all playing video games. It's not just kids playing either. According to the Entertainment Software Association, 58% of all Americans play video games, and nearly half of Americans over 50 play. The 58% mentioned are adults, but it will be increased when we include Australians like yourself, Connor, and other people around the world. Do you think video games affect adults differently than kids, and why?
I think it depends on, first of all, if we're thinking about adults in 2019. So you're thinking about adults. The term adult can go anywhere from 20. Like you would, like if you were defining a person as an adult, you would kind of say like 20, 21, or like the age in Australia where someone's defined as an adult is 18. That's when you can buy alcohol and cigarettes and stuff like that. But I know that in North America, it's 21. Is it the same in Canada?
In Canada, it's 19.
19. Okay, cool. So, remind me what the question was again, please.
So I said, do you think that video games affect adults differently than kids?
That's
and why?
right. Yeah, no, so I'm thinking about, depends on if you grew up playing video games or if you just get into it, because lots of video games now you can classify a video, like a smartphone game as a video game, right? You know, like a game on your phone where you're surfing and you've got to collect coins or something. That can be classified as a video game now. So I don't think if you were playing video games when you were growing up and then you led into your adulthood still playing video games, like even if it's just like some little games on your phone like I was talking about, or if every now and then you bust out the PS3 or something like that, I don't think there'd be much of a difference there. But if you didn't play video games growing up, and then you started to look at some of these competitive video games that are on smartphones, like apps, different games that are on your smartphone, I think that would be a bit different I think you would see a little bit more of the competitive side of it. Or you could not. You could be the total 180 degrees side of it, where you could just go, no, it's silly. It's just a game, you know.
Yeah, you're so right. Because as you were mentioning that, I was remembering I used to be one of the biggest gamers ever. Like really good, like competing, gambling for money, everything. Like sometimes I would even play with one hand so I can get competition because a lot of people were scared of me. They knew me as the best. So
wow.
It's interesting now. There's a complete contrast. I do not play video games at all. It's not like I hate it, but I think it's important also that my kids are getting into video games now. I don't think they're not that much into that deep, but my daughter definitely, she loves the video games and she is really getting into it more and more. And I think it's important that I do not look at it in a way like it's so bad, it's so negative, it's violent, it's crazy, it's going to make you this, it's going to make you that. I think that it gives me something to do with them and something again I can educate them about and something I can even just they want me to play with them, so I don't mind doing it. It's not my forte, it's not something that I have any particular interest in, but because it gives me something to do with my kids, I think, and I have the knowledge about it, I think it's important that we also understand that it can affect us, maybe, as you said, in different ways depending on how we approach it, basically. So I love the fact that you mentioned that.
And think about the just the basic skills side of playing video games, like hand-eye coordination. And like just reading skills, like looking at the screen and like there's a new word that you haven't seen before, and you know, you think, what does that one mean? And you see new words and that one goes into your brain, and then you think, I want to know what that one means. And then like I said, hand-eye coordination, you learn new words. Like I've been playing I've been playing video games since I was very young, and lots and lots of words in my vocabulary I would owe that to playing video games.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And I'm a pro wrestling fan, and so lots of the different terminology I owe to playing like all of the different wrestling games and watching it for so long and that. So you know, just like all the different knowledge that you gain from just playing a video game, say it's set in like 1940 1940s in Germany or something like that, you're going to pick up something from that, you know, like whether it's the hat that they wear or whether it's what the flag looks like or something. I know that's not a very nice example to give, but do you know what I mean?
I think it's a great example because I remember even before I flew to North America, I had ideas and visuals about what the place would look like, what the road would look like, what side. I mean, you can get some of this information from watching TV shows too, but it's important that you mention that there is words you pick up on, there's words you may have to go search. Now you can actually, it's easier, you can Google those words, but there is things you have to figure out. And I remember even there was a game called Gran Turismo, was a car racing game, and you had to actually get your driver's license before you would start racing. And so
I remember Gran Turismo. I remember it.
And there was different levels of your license. So there was so much you can definitely learn from video games too, right? Even though there may be some violence, but in reality, we live in a world where there is violence. So if you're having a video game that's close to reality, it would make sense that there is some level of violence in there. So I'm really happy you touched on that educational point, that there is things the kids can actually elevate or increase their knowledge in life about, and they can be advanced even from and by playing video games. And I'm really happy you touched on that.
Of course. There is way more to video games than violence. You know that there are plenty of video games that have nothing to do with violence, and even the games that do have some violence, even the games that have violence, or even the games that have like they're violent from the start to the end. There's still like either facts or even just word, like I was talking about vocabulary before, like even just like words that you haven't learnt before that you think, I wonder what that one means, and then you end up looking it up, and you end up learning something new, even if it's just something as simple as a little word that you didn't know before, or you know what I'm talking about.
That's perfect. I'm so grateful that you mentioned that. Last year, in 2018, in a series of experiments with more than 3,000 participants here in Canada, the team demonstrated that video games concepts do not prime players to behave in a certain way or ways, and that increasing the reality of violent video games does not necessarily increase aggression in game players. So they're basically saying, this study was done at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada last year, and they found that there is nothing that ties violent video games to the aggression of violence in people that play video games. Does this surprise you? Why or why not?
It doesn't surprise me at all, Jahf. I think a lot of the situations where people have been talked about with their relation to violent video games or like extreme metal music or something like that, I think it all comes down to what happened in that person's life from when they were born until that moment. Because I think, you know, like, I love listening to very, very heavy metal, like stuff that is hard to show people that don't listen to heavy metal, because it's like they don't understand it. So I think on that topic, kind of there, I think it would be a little bit hard. Like, you have to think about everyone and their upbringing, or what they've been taught is right and what's wrong. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Definitely, that makes sense. It's really basically comes down to the individual.
Yes, yeah, and like I was saying, yeah, what they've been taught is right and what they've been taught is wrong. And so, you know, like someone that has grown up around violence, and then they start playing violent video games. Sure, I would put two and two together and say like, yeah, that person, that kind of explains why they're extra violent. But if someone that's grown up in a non-violent environment, they haven't experienced aggression in their life, and they're just, you know, you watch movies where there's people that are shooting each other, but they're classic movies, you know, that have gotten tons of awards and everything, and you can watch all of those, you can play all those games, and it doesn't mean that you're going to end up being a violent person.
Wow, that's so important. I'm so happy you touched on that. So basically you're saying there is other events or situations or experiences in your life that can contribute to you being violent, not specific or necessarily video games only.
Of course, yeah, of course. Yeah, like, I don't really, you know, I don't really want to go much further into that, because you can just imagine, you know, if you were to grow up around violence, you know, you would have a bit of a more sour brain than other people, you know.
Definitely, that makes sense. So we have come to this part of the show that I'm really excited for. It's it's your time for you to give us your tips and strategies. So, with that being said, what would be your tip, Connor? What would be a tip for parents and kids in regards to violent video games?
I would say just like as far as to parents, if your kid wants to buy a video game, any kind of video game, just ask them straight like, so what kind of game is this? What do you do in this video game? And then yourself, if you're a parent, research the game if possible. There's nothing wrong with playing games with violence in them, like I've said already. So as far as that as with parents and for children, really, same thing. I would research it before you play it. You know, like if you may end up playing it and you may find out it's not what you want to do at all, and it might be a really bad experience for you if it's a multiplayer game, especially because people can be very, very cruel on those multiplayer ones.
Wow, that's perfect. I feel like you gave tips and strategies in that there. However, what would be your strategy or strategies in regards to violent video games?
Strategies. I'm not really sure as far as strategies. I don't know. Just do your research. Really, yeah. I'm not sure.
I feel like you give your strategies also in the tips, so that's good. So that brings us to my tips.
I'm sorry that I didn't have a better.
No, that's perfect because you already gave your strategies with the tips. So that brings us to my tips and strategies. My tip would be, there's a really popular Bible verse which I love that says, it's not what goes into a man that defile him, that ruins him, that makes him seem messed up. It's not what goes into him that defiles him, but what comes out of him. I say that to say, yes, it's important to be mindful of what video games we play and what we watch, but it's more important to pay attention to the way we interact with, respond to, and treat others. Video game addiction is a bigger concern than violence in video games. To find out if you have any of these symptoms that can be symbolic to addictions in video games, please click the link. It will take you to a really helpful page. It's a very short page to read, and it gives you some idea if you are addicted to video games or not. That link will also be in the description of this video. My strategies: understand it's okay to talk and acknowledge, also discuss the issues surrounding violent video games. This part of the show is called For You and About You, Connor. However, before you go into this part, I think it's important to note that we are in two different time zones. It's around 9:45 a.m. here in North America. And what time is it where you at?
It's trying to look at. It's 1:45 in the morning on Friday, the 8th of February.
Perfect, and it's Thursday here still. So I wanted to mention that because there were some parts that people may be wondering why you were not too sure or were not hearing the questions too well. So I wanted to kind of get that out there just as a reason why we probably have that, because you're probably ready for bed as most people would be at 1:45. So this part of the show is called For You and About You, Connor. Tell the wonderful listeners in the city of Jahf Reach what you'd like them to know about you and what you do, and also how they may contact you.
Well, mate, thank you. I run Nuclear Sound Studio in Currambong, New South Wales, Australia. And it's a home recording studio where I get bands from Sydney, Australia, Newcastle, Australia, They come to me because I do competitive prices and I always leave them with a good product. And so if you need to find me, you can go onto Facebook and just type in Nuclear Sound Studio. And I have also a SoundCloud page. If you type in Connor Macdonald, M-A-C, Macdonald, you'll be able to, a producer, you'll be able to find some of my recordings on SoundCloud.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Connor. On behalf of the Jahf Reach Show, open-minded, not blinded, challenge your mindset, there is no limitation for you. We want to say thank you so much. We got some wonderful feedback and comments. We are deeply moved by these and they help encourage us to keep doing this for you and about you. If you have any comments, feedback or something to add in regard to this topic today, please send us an email to jahfreach@gmail.com. So that's JAHF reach@gmail.com. If you want to get in contact with Connor or you need any more information about him, please feel free to send us an email also or reach out to us by direct messaging or instant messaging. On behalf of the Jahf Reach Show, thank you so much for being loyal listeners and part of the city of Jahf Reach. We appreciate you so much. Please remember to find us at Jahf Reach. That's on Google, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, iTunes, Facebook, WhatsApp, and all that. Comment, like, share, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Please remember, most importantly, do not keep the message to yourself. Please share it with someone else. Until the next one, it's Jahf Reach, not Jahf. Come. Salute Kaba.